So are we ready to go?
Yes.
All right. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jeff Budd, and I'll be the moderator for this. And I work for the College to Career. And our presenter is Lisa Busch, a 32-year resident of Alaska. And she asks if you have questions to put them on the chat part. And then when she comes to a point to ask, she'll ask for the questions and I'll relate them to them. And I want to thank the University of Alaska Southeast Complete to Compete program for hosting this, and Leah Mason for her great tech support. Please take it away, Lisa.
Okay, so I'm just going to dive in. I feel like, just to sort of start things off, I feel that in Alaska, we are natural networkers, in large part because we are such a small state population-wise. And if you ever notice in Alaska, when an airplane comes in, people go over to see who is coming in on the plane. This is very unique to Alaska. This doesn't happen in New York City. I can assure you it doesn't happen at Newark Airport. And part of that is a little bit of like, oh, maybe one of my friends is on the plane, but sometimes it's just networking. I often, watch who's getting off the plane when I'm at the Juneau gate, because there's usually a governor or a congressman or a state senator or representative that I may chance to have an opportunity to talk to. So, so I feel like in Alaska we have a lot of natural opportunities to network. And when Jeff first approached me about talking about networking, I had to give a little think first and thought, can you teach people to network? Is it something that you just sort of, you just have or you don't have? And I absolutely believe networking is something you can learn. And I am the shining example of that. I definitely learned how to do it. So just to kind of back up a little bit and tell you a little bit about my background and sort of how I came to my job and how networking has kind of played into that. My own background is I majored in geology and environmental studies when I was an undergraduate. And I think that I grew up in kind of a science oriented family. And because of the sort of culture of my family, we were sort of encouraged to ask questions and question each other. That included questioning our parents and questioning authority and things like that. But also questioning was encouraged at the dinner table. And then as a science student, as an undergraduate, asking questions is just part of the game, right? That's what we do in science. We come up with questions. How can we figure out how to answer this or that question? So I'm coming from that perspective. And then my first real job after college was I was a reporter. I got a job. My first job was at Raven Radio here in Sitka at the public radio station. And so now I went from studying science to a job in a public radio station in a small town in Alaska. And very quickly, I took those questioning skills and I applied them to being a reporter. And I think that, sort of asking people questions is fundamental to networking and learning about what is going on. And as a reporter, the way sort of one of my rules of thumb for knowing if something was a story or not was if 3 different people were talking about something. So, hey, did you see these plastic toys washed up on the beach over at Cruise Off? And I think, no, I didn't see those. But if I heard someone in the coffee shop and then someone in the grocery store also, bringing up those topics, then I would start to think, oh, well, maybe that is a story. And that kind of connecting the dots, that kind of hearing something here, hearing something here, and hearing something over here, that is also a kind of networking. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But just in terms of my own background, really that's where it started. And I think that kind of connecting the dots is also about noticing patterns. And that is also a very important aspect of networking, is noticing patterns. So now I'm the executive director of the Sitka Sound Science Center, which is a nonprofit dedicated to science research and science education. And in my own job now as the executive director, I do a fair amount of networking. So in our mission statement, I didn't say our complete mission statement, but there's something about locally relevant. We are trying to conduct locally relevant research. So in my own job, what I do is I hear from the community. I might hear from 3 or 4 different community members, or maybe different organizations, that they're genuinely interested in a certain subject. So for example, a few years ago, we started to get a whole bunch of squid in Sitka Sound, and people were all of a sudden very interested in this, and what is their life cycle, and what are they doing here, and are they mating, are they eating, blah, blah, blah. Can we have a commercial fishery? We really didn't know very much about them, and so we, as the science center that does locally relevant research, we went out and we said, oh, we need to get a squid researcher here. So as part of my job, I had to network to find out who that person would be. Who would be the person that we would want to bring to our community to study something that people here are very interested in. So that required a lot of research. That required a lot of talking to people. Some people I knew, some people I didn't know. And then calling people up and asking them about their interest, asking them about the kinds of things they studied. And I do this every single day. I mean, that's just an example of one researcher, but I do this in terms of who would be interested in funding science, who would be interested in funding science education. And so I'm not just talking to my friends and family, which, believe me, would be a lot easier for me in a lot of ways because of my kind of personality. But I have to push myself to talk outside of my own little bubble and just the people I interact with on a daily basis, push myself outside of maybe what I'm comfortable with to get to find out the experts that I need to be in touch with for work, for our organization to be successful. So anyway, so that's kind of my own background, and how I kind of how I use networking and why it's important. And I guess I just have to think, I mean, I have to say that I think networking is a very, very important quality. It doesn't matter where you are in the echelon of your organization, networking is critical. It's critical to finding a job. It's critical to finding out what other people are thinking and what they're doing and what trends are out there. And it's very important in connecting you to a bigger fabric of the world. And I mean, where would we be right now without networking with COVID-19? I mean, if someone got the disease and a doctor, let's say someone got the disease and a doctor saw them and they didn't convey that information to other people, we would be in a lot worse situation. And we're networking as a science community, trying to figure out how to come up with a vaccine, how to come up with treatments. We're calling the people who are experts and trying to connect those people together, and then eventually connect ourselves to that broader scientific and medical community. So it's important in our everyday lives. It's not just about getting a job, but it's very important in getting a job. So with that, I can take a breath. If someone has a question before I launch into what is networking, sort of what the definition is in my mind.
It interests me that I would never have guessed that you were someone who was reticent about making connections with people. And I guess that's kind of, that is the definition. I mean, people, I am also not someone who is someone that, likes to go out and meet people at parties, but if I have a reason to talk to people, then I believe that networking is a very important thing for almost anything we do to pull in resources.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I was going to talk about that specifically a little later, but essentially, I think people in this country, we kind of value extroverts. I mean, just as a culture. And, you know, if you're good at a cocktail party, if you're big man on campus, most valuable player, you know, these are the people that we value in our country. And introverts, you know, don't get the main spotlight, but they do a lot of the work and they come up with a lot of creative ideas. There's a book about this that was published a couple of years ago that's excellent, called Quiet. And it's about, you know, sort of the power of introverts and how we should adjust a little bit as a culture. But it's a good point to bring up that you don't have to be an extrovert to network. And I think people think, oh, well, you know, she likes to talk to different people. She likes to put herself out there. And so it's easy for her. I am actually an introvert, which means that my energy is generated by being by myself, alone, quiet. And I have to push myself to be extroverted. And I do it. I mean, I do it all day long. I push myself. And then at the end of the day, you know, I just come home and I don't want to talk. I don't want to do anything. But I have learned these skills. I have learned sort of extrovert skills that make it easier for me to network and to be engaged with people. And a lot of it does come back to asking questions. Asking questions is a very, very powerful tool, especially for introverts. You know, you go into, I mean, for me, I go to a big party and I see all these people and I think, oh, this is a big party, this is overwhelming. But if I have one person at that party that I want to connect with, and I have just a few key questions that I want to ask them, then it can be a lot easier. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So in terms of sort of what I think networking is, and I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think networking is, just like one sentence of what you think networking is.
Just before we get into that, Amy had a question. She's got her hand up.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that.
That's fine. I just, you did say that you were introverted, and I sometimes see that introvert-extrovert balance in people, students, children, coworkers, and I just wondered if you could give some tips on motivating people to ask those questions, because I think you're spot on with being able to be a good listener and be a good communicator. And we do train our competencies are based around how to get information from patients, but from a professional side of things, just wondering what some motivation tips to get people to think about who they would want to connect with and what their 15 degrees of separation are to help them become successful. So that would be the motivation side of things. As far as your question, when I think of a network, I think of a community of practice. I've done some research in communities of practice, particularly in my own field of medical assisting, and I've actually created some communities of practice, formally and informally, and so that's kind of what I think of.
Okay. Greg?
I guess I have a question about the difference. It sounds like what you're talking about is a very individualized thing. And my involvement with networking up until our Southeast Career Consortium, bit the dust about 5 years ago, was trying to get organizations to work with each other. But we had a really dynamic association between the Sitka School District, the university, the tribe, Mount Edgecombe High School, and I'm sure there were some others.
But essentially your idea is sort of getting organizations to work together.
And they really worked well for a while. And then I think declining funding made it a little bit more of a competitive thing rather than a collaborative thing.
Okay, all right.
I'm interested to hear your opinion or your take on how to transfer the personal networking into the organizational networking.
All right, we'll come back to that. Jeff, your one sentence about what is networking to you?
Yeah, going out, meeting people, and seeing how we can work together.
Okay, I like it. What about you, Leah?
Oh, me and networking. I network when I see resources in one place needed in another place and common interests. So for me, networking is about bringing together resources and interests to make bigger things happen.
Oh, I like it. That's a great one. That's a good definition. Emmy, are you just jumping in here?
Sorry, I realized I was still muted. To me, I guess networking is basically a spider web. You don't realize how many interconnections that you may have between the connections that you do have. So.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's great. And what about you, Barb? One sentence.
Well, I just say connecting with people to get their ideas.
Oh, I like that too. Oh, these are lovely. Okay, well, I love it. I love this. You guys gave the spectrum, really, of really what I think networking is. Networking is asking people for advice. That is a kind of networking. Networking is meeting new people. It's asking people about the issues in their life, at their work. It's about telling people about yourself. And that's important, but not absolutely critical. It is definitely about it's definitely about making connections, whether that is about a specific job or just about listening. Those are all different there's all different kinds of ways of networking. To me, there are a few kind of critical, I wouldn't call them, they're critical qualities that go in networking. And that is two things that everybody, I think, has, and that is curiosity and an interest in the world. And I think those are two elements that really make networking important and critical. So how do you network? And this is like, I really hadn't thought about this until Jeff asked me to talk about this subject. And I kind of have, in my mind, I sort of have two sort of main two sort of main pipelines, if you will, for networking. And then the way you do it requires a host of skills that can be honed and practiced over time. And so we're going to talk about those things. So the first way is connecting with who you want to connect with. So this is the 6 degrees of separation idea. So I run a nonprofit. Every nonprofit needs money. I want to connect with Bill Gates. Okay. So how am I going to do that? Who do I know who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who works at the Gates Foundation who can connect me to Bill Gates? So that's one way. And then another way of the other sort of pipeline of networking is just connecting with the people I know to get information, to get new information, to be open to new information. So that is about connecting with relatives, connecting with neighbors, with a friend of a friend, a banker, realizing basically that you can find anything out if you do the research, that you can find anything out is a form of networking. So there's kind of these two sort of pipelines. And then the kinds of things that go into those two different pipelines require communication skills. And I was a science major, and I worked in college. I worked in an herbarium, which is not a greenhouse. It is like a library of dead plants. And I worked there by myself. That was my college job. So I was not trained in communication skills, is my point. When I got my job at the public radio station, I learned on the job over a couple of years. I picked up on a few communication techniques. And then in the last 30 years of my career, I have practiced these techniques. So I'm going to talk about what I think some of the just sort of communication skills are that go into networking that are important. And I don't say them like as a list so that when you hear something you say, oh, well, I'm not that you just tune it out, because again, these are things that need to be practiced and that can be practiced in lots and lots of different opportunities. So the first thing I was going to say, you already touched on, Leah, is you do not have to be an extrovert. You can be an introvert and still network. And what the advice I give to true introverted introverts is to think in advance about some basic questions that, or an agenda item. Think in advance of your social situation. So I'm just going to give you a recent example. So we have at the Science Center, we're working online like everybody else. A bunch of us are working online. And I have this kind of fear as the director that we're all going our different ways. We're working in our dining rooms or our bathrooms or whatever it is, and we're not as connected as an organization. So my idea was, oh, we're going to have a Zoom meeting every morning at 9 o'clock. So we all, there's like 15 of us, and we hop in, and I just said, oh, this can be 15 minutes. We can just talk about anything. It doesn't matter. It can be something work related, unwork related. It's just kind of like see your, connect with people, see these faces, hear if there's anything we have in common, and then move on. So we were doing this for a couple weeks, and there were some people who were dominating the conversation. And I didn't realize it. I didn't notice it, but I got an email from an employee who said, these meetings really suck. They're hard for introverts. And I took that to heart. But as the leader of the organization, I really see them as great networking opportunities. I mean, we're keeping each other. I'm giving someone else information, or I say, hey, is anybody else having these commuter problems? And then we communicate together. Oh, all three of us are having this computer problem, and then let's go solve it, or let's go find the right person together. So I see them as networking opportunities. So I felt like I didn't want to stop having the meetings, but I was very sensitive to this introvert comment. So the advice that, the sort of compromise that we came up with was that she said, well, I can never get a word in edgewise, and there's just a few people that dominate, and I don't have anything to add. And I said, okay, absolutely, you have something to add, but you have to be more conscious. She wanted an agenda for each meeting. And I said, well, we're probably not going to have an agenda because they're not that formal. So what our compromise was she came up with her own agenda in her head. She picked 2 agenda items, and she would get that point across no matter what, no matter who spoke. And then I would make space for her to get those points across. So anyway, that's a long way of saying you don't have to be an extrovert to be a networker. As far as other communication skills go, and this might scare the introverts a little bit, but first impressions definitely matter. And when you're trying to network, say for work, but this is true of if you're just networking in your neighborhood to get to know your neighborhood and find out if you all have the same issues about a noisy neighbor, or you just want to meet each other, you want to meet your neighbor, your first impression really does matter. And I know as a teenager, I kind of railed against that. I didn't want to hear that, when my mom would say, you shouldn't wear those ripped jeans, because people are going to think you're a certain kind of person. Like all things with mothers, she was absolutely right. And even though I don't like it, it is a true thing. And you just need to know that. So if you're trying to make a good impression with someone, know that your first impression is going to be the strongest. And there have been many, many scientific studies about this. And there's been studies that show the first thing you say and the last thing you say to someone are the 2 things they're going to remember. So you might have a conversation with someone and you're going to go all over the board and talk about lots of different things. But the first thing you say and the last thing you say are going to be the most memorable. So really be conscious about what you want those things to be. Another sort of small thing, but it is a communication skill, and that is eye contact. And I know that is not important in every single culture, but for the most part in the United States at this particular moment, eye contact does make a difference. And people will remember that. They will remember that you made eye contact with them and that you held their eye contact. And if you look off to the right or left, which maybe I'm doing right now because I don't know where to look on the screen, that can seem distracting, and it can seem that you don't care. It can come across as you might not care or be as engaged in the conversation. So eye contact is a simple thing, but it definitely does matter. And kind of with those, with that, you know, sort of dress also matters. So dress the part. If you are meeting someone for a job where you're going to work in an office, you should wear office-like clothes. If you are talking to someone who might be the person who knows someone who's, you know, the person that you want to meet, and you're gonna, you know, you want a job in an office, you should look like you know, someone that is gonna want to, someone who's gonna fit in an office. And that means dressing appropriately. And again, that isn't maybe how we want the world to turn, but that just is how it is in so many people's minds, that it's a really important thing. Another communication skill that I've already talked about, and it's something that I, you know, feel really near and dear to, and that is asking questions. So I've done a tiny experiment with this in the last year, where I decided I you know, now I was a reporter for 20 years, and now I just go into question mode. So it comes naturally to me. But I noticed about a year ago that people didn't always ask me questions, and it was kind of a turnoff. Like if they were just interested in talking about themselves and they just wanted me to keep feeding them questions, yeah, I could do that. I mean, I can do it for hours. Like, I'm trained now as a reporter. I know how to do it, but it's exhausting. And it kind of shows, to me, it comes across as a lack of interest and a lack of curiosity. And I think, again, curiosity is one of the main things that I think goes into networking. So asking questions is really, really important. And there is this great book. It's not, I don't think it's in print, but you can get it very easily on eBay and things like that. And it was written by Barbara Walters, and it's called How to Talk to Anyone About Anything. A very short, skinny little book, and it's just really about making conversation. So if you think, oh, I'm not a good conversationalist, I can't be a good networker, you really only need a few good questions. And they're just not yes or no questions. You don't want to ask people, you know, oh, how's your day going? And that's like a dead ender. And questions lead to conversation. The reason I put so much emphasis on questions is questions lead to conversation, and conversation leads to connection. And connection is what networking is all about. Whether it's, you know, finding a date or getting a job, or getting to know someone that you want to know, you know, that Bill Gates situation. You are trying to make human connections, and you're trying to make a path of human connections. So that asking questions is really important. And what I do, and I worked for a cultural anthropologist for 10 years, so I have a tiny bit of a leg on this, but I would say to myself, how would an anthropologist approach this situation? And when I talk to people on the airplane, which I tend not to want to do, it's not like the thing that I'm drawn to, but when I do get into a conversation with someone on the airplane, I think, I've never heard of this job before. I am going to ask them questions and find out what the culture of their job is, find out what the culture of their, find out what their background is that led them to get this position. And so I kind of put myself in that anthropologist position when I think about what kinds of questions I want to ask. And then on the flip side, and then I have also made a little study of this in my communication training over the last couple of years, that is listening. Listening is very, very important. And I'm just going to give you an example of, you know, sort of the value of listening. When I first moved to Sitka, I was 20. And there was a guy who, all the sort of 20-somethings we used to hang out with, he wasn't particularly attractive. He didn't have like so much money or so much charm, but he always got the new, interesting, hot woman. And we did a little study on this guy, and we watched him operate, not just with women, but with other people. And what it was he would ask people questions, and he would listen to the response. And that was so unusual. That was so unusual. He would respond with another question that showed he had listened to the answer. And it sounds easy, but it is very, very rare. So often, no, it wasn't my husband. But often what we do is, you know, if we're nervous, we have a list of questions and we just want to ask one question after another. But if you can relax a tiny bit and truly, truly listen and then ask a question maybe that, you know, demonstrates that you have heard the person, you open yourself up to finding out so much more and having much, much deeper connections. Yes, it definitely builds rapport and trust. You know, you're showing someone, you're demonstrating to someone that you really care. And that is a really important part of networking. Because I think sometimes, and I have to say, when Jeff asked me to talk about networking, I thought, well, do people think I'm like a phony person because I like to network? Like, is that seen as a superficial thing? But I really think it's the opposite. I think it is kind of getting down a little deeper with people and finding out, you know, ways that you can connect with another person. And that does take a little more time, a little more effort, and it has a sort of the end result can be a little bit of a better feeling. So let's see, demonstrating curiosity. Oh, and sort of, and then I can't remember who asked this question, but kind of like some sort of basic skills. I don't know if you were getting at this, Amy, but sort of basic conversation skills. One of those basic skills is finding commonality. And we do it naturally, again, as Alaskans, like, oh, you're from Ninilchik? Hey, my brother used to work in Ninilchik. Do you know blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. You know, that is networking. Finding commonalities. I don't know if this is a negative story or not, but I thought of it as a positive for my organization. One time I was at a party, a reception for a foundation, and all the foundation board members were there. And I really didn't know these people. I didn't know any of them. I should have looked them up, you know, in advance and known who they all were, but I didn't. And so I just said hello to the first person I met. And he introduced himself. He told me he was a board member. And then he said he was from back east. And my mind just went blank. And I thought, like, and I'm from New England, but I just couldn't think of any way to connect with this guy. And so I said, oh, where did you go to college? And he told me where he went to college. It was Bowdoin, back east in Maine. And I said, oh, my brother went to Bowdoin. And we got to talking, and I said, funny story. My brother's son applied to Bowdoin. My brother was a big alumni giver at Bowdoin. And I tell this story to this board member, right? I said, my brother was a big donor. And then his son applied, and his son was a straight A student, really good kid, smart. And he applied early decision, and he didn't even get deferred. He just got rejected. And my brother was so angry, he called me up and he said, I am going to send you the same money I would have given Bowdoin. But the catch is you have to take a picture of the check and fax it to Bowdoin and tell them why you're doing that. So anyway, I start telling this story to this board member, and he's kind of looking at me like, you're crazy. But he says, that's horrible that Bowdoin didn't accept your brother's son. And we get to chatting, this was our connection, and we get to chatting, and he said, so what do you do? And I got to tell him all about the Science Center and get really excited and talk about the thing that I was really interested in. And then I heard about what his job was. I asked him about what his job was, which is some money investing stuff that I knew nothing about, absolutely nothing about. But I said, oh, that's interesting. And I kept asking him questions about it. Lo and behold, we made a little connection. That was my only real conversation that I had at this cocktail party. And I go back to work. A week later, I get a $5,000 check from this guy. And he said, that story really made an impression on me. And it all started with me just, asking him where he went to school, and then making this connection of commonality, that I also had a brother that goes there. And I think we all do that naturally. We just don't always say it. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, pushing yourself to maybe make that commonality in words is a really big part of networking.
Did you do what he told you to do?
Yeah, I did. I did. Oh, my brother. Yeah, that was easy. I mean, for me, I had no connection to Bowdoin. I was so great. Yeah. So then let's see, how are we on time? So then the question becomes, quite a bit over 25 minutes. The question becomes, what to do to network? And I think it's much, much bigger than all of us individually would think of. If you were just to write a list, if we're going by your individual your definitions of communities of practice, connecting organizations, going out and meeting people, bringing resources in common together, a spider web. These are all great definitions of what networking is, and you could do all of those things by this kind of, I guess what I'm trying to get at is what to do to network. And that is attending events. Attending events, again, you kind of have to push yourself if you're an introvert, but I push myself to attend events that don't seem like a natural, like, yes, going to scientific conferences, of course, this is an event that I would go to. But I also push myself, so I'll once in a while, I'll go to the local emergency planning committee meeting, and I'll find out what are they up to these days. And I often hear things that, oh, you're applying for FEMA money? Well, we have emergency response issues at the Science Center. Maybe I could apply for FEMA money too. Or I'll go to a hospital board meeting, or there's something in Sitka called the Wu Chin, and I'll go to that. And I'm there to listen. And that is networking, is attending events. Giving before you ask, I think, is another important thing in networking. Offering to volunteer, offering assistance, getting involved in something without the expectation that something is going to come back to you. Just pure giving is a good way to network. And being strategic about that. So not joining every single club on the university campus or in Sitka or in your community, but being very strategic. Like this is, I mean, of course, Rotary and sort of social service clubs and organizations. Those are clubs that you might join if you want to meet leaders around the community. The Chamber of Commerce, joining the Chamber of Commerce if you want to meet business owners. You can be a little strategic. You don't have to join every single thing. And then a big sort of take home that I hope I've instilled in you is this pushing yourself to do something that maybe feels a little bit uncomfortable, but will come back to you in terms of networking and thinking across disciplines. So I think, you're in the health field, Amy, and so you're thinking like, I'm going to connect with people in the health field. But if you don't know where there might be a connection in a discipline beyond the health field. I mean, maybe the business discipline or the natural sciences, or, the list is endless. but things that are outside of your wheelhouse. And it just doesn't have to be a direct connection. And then also, I think just in terms of students per se, students, I think aren't necessarily taught in high school that they need to make connections with people in the university and college settings. So you can network through your professors, through your own professors, through the friends you make or the people that you work with in the university setting. And that is where you can start to build your network. And keeping in touch with these people, critical. I still keep in touch with my college advisors, and I send them little notes, I thank them, and I, as an employer, and I also get personal notes and things like that from people who have worked for me. And it's really great because it keeps them in the front of my mind. So when a job comes up, I can think, oh, I just heard from little Susie. Now she's the first person I'm going to think of when a job comes up. And using those school connections, I think, is really important. Also, not just the professors, but your internships, the jobs you have at school, to really build your network, whether they're volunteer or paid. And then the last thing I didn't really get into, and you all and students certainly are probably more experts at this than I am, and that is social media. Very, very important way to network. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We use these both as a social platform and a job, sort of professional platform. So my caution is know that those are things that do overlap. And if you don't want a future employer to know things in your personal life, then don't post them, because we look up people on Facebook when we hire people, and I know college admissions officers do that sometimes, and sometimes those things are not that flattering. So be judicious in how you use those things, but they can be very, very powerful tools for getting a feel for a topic, getting a feel for a person, finding out information about a person before you actually make a call or you try to meet them.
Yeah.
So with that, I will take a breath and ask for your feedback as well as your questions.
This is where I should have prepared a question for this particular part and thought about asking everybody else to prepare a question for this particular part. I guess I could ask for it. So I'm working, since I got to Sitka, on a proposal to look at the various aspects that would need to be in place to kind of make Sitka, put Sitka on the map as a place where renewable energy could be developed, for instance. So having thought through all the networks, because I think in flow charts and spider webs and who needs to play into different parts of it. And I do come up against this situation of, who do I do know people who are in different parts of the system, but I also come in Sitka. It's interesting that how many circles there are and how some of them connect and others do not. And so I think part of Greg's, question earlier is how do you connect circles that are a bit stubborn?
that don't want to intersect.
People who don't touch. And it's,
yeah. I mean, it's hard to move a whole organization. And I think the best way to do that is just as an individual. You can be the conduit yourself. And you can just, I think, Greg, you had a challenge there because you were doing it for a lot of different organizations. But really, if you're trying to coordinate, connect two organizations, I think, asking them to overlap might seem like a giant task. But if you're attending both meetings, of two different organizations, you can share that information. I mean, that's the whole idea behind the assembly, the city council assembly. They have liaisons. So they have a liaison from the tribe who comes and reports to the assembly, and then they'll have assembly members who liaison to these different committees who report back. and you know, that is kind of a way to keep us all connected. But I know what you mean. I mean, sometimes the gap is too great culturally. Like they just might, you know, have very different cultures as organizations, and all you can do as an individual is be that one person who connects them.
Yeah, thank you.
I think organizations are, the networking that goes on with organizations needs to be looked at as a living thing that needs to be nurtured. I think that could have been something that was an issue with our Sitka School Consortium. Lots of success. They did a lot of things that was even before my time. You know, they had the welding program and the construction program built over at the university. They built the Southeast Career Consortium, but it was just like, man, you have to maintain those relationships, and it's not an easy thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess that really picks up on for me, networks are, you know, a lot of what Lisa's saying about listening and expressing interest and curiosity in things. Even if you look at that, you know, the kind of thing that makes people attractive is their interest in you. A lot of sometimes it's, you know, that may be the first thing that interests you about them, is that they're interested in you and you pay more attention. And I guess, you know, what you're saying there with the network needing constant kind of attendance is that sense. And that I feel that people, we when there's organizational relationships, we think about the organization, but it's really the people in those organizations that do that nurturing, that do that reaching out and paying attention. And so we can get a bit lazy maybe about, well, the organization's still here, why aren't they talking to each other? Because there's nobody inside them talking to each other.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That is a very good point.
Lisa, I'm curious. I just heard a podcast this morning about millennials checking their phones every 8 minutes. It's been determined, and looking at people who connect virtually, or I teach online the majority of the semester. My preferred method of communication is email, because I'm a very strong writer and I can put my thoughts in a kind of a concrete way, and I really like email. However, I find I have a lot better luck if I look somebody in the eye and I say, hey, would you be willing to come and speak at this conference for me? Or what, would you be willing to do this for me? Or would you consider, you know, doing this? So I find a lot more success looking them face to face. So I'm wondering if you have suggestions, if there's a happy medium between online and virtual and writing. And, you know, for people whose preferred method is writing, it's easy for them to say no because they're not looking you in the face. But when you want something from them, it's sometimes, you know, it's this balance. So do you have any online?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, and this would be something to include next time to have a little more of a discussion of this. But the I think the email is so powerful, and you were kind of getting at it, Emmy, with your comment about sending a little message with your LinkedIn connection, because you can think about it and be really careful with your words. But I find that millennials are even hesitant to call people on the telephone.
Yeah, they don't text.
And that is tough, because I think and now with Zoom and all this, having those face-to-face does make a difference, and it is a stronger connection, and that is something that we're kind of losing right now during this whole pandemic, is that direct contact. There's something powerful about it, and that's why we gather, you know, as human beings, and to be in the presence of someone else can be extremely powerful. This is a tiny bit corny, and maybe next time if I did this again, I would start with this story. But a few years ago, I was back east for a family celebration, and a family friend, we were sitting at the dinner table with a family friend, and it was a religious event. And this guy who is this family friend, his name is Lou, he was a Holocaust advisor. He was a Holocaust survivor. And I turned to him and I said, did did surviving the Holocaust make you believe in God more? Because this was a religious event. It wasn't that I wasn't making conversation, but he said, no, not at all. He said, surviving the Holocaust made me believe in the power of human connection. That's what I believe in. And all these things that we're talking about today, that's what it's about. It's about this, it's about the human connection. Yes, it might be about getting a job or furthering your career, but the very nugget of it, the seed of this, is all about connecting to other human beings. Is that a good way to end? Because that's going to be the only thing you remember.
Well,
okay, let me ask you guys this one last question. So, okay, we talked for you know, a while now. What are two things you will remember about this this talk?
I guess it feels like it should be obvious, but yes, that sense in which it's important to be the conduit between things. You don't always have to look for existing conduits. You can be that thing. And my concern about the non-connecting circles in Sitka is a thing for me to go out and then figure out where these meetings are and then attend all of them and make them aware of each other's crossovers and where there could be useful collaboration to achieve common aims that they don't know about at the moment.
That's a good one. What else did you get from this?
I'll jump in for a second. I think the final thing you said, it's all person to person. And then when you were talking about the introvert thing, I think you just have to be willing to make those uncomfortable approaches and then not take it personally. I mean, I've been in the nonprofit realm for years and years too, and you're always asking for money. And my job is to ask, and their job is to say yes or no. And that's the way it is, and that's okay.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that not taking it personally thing is really important. I should hit more on that. Yeah, it's a good point.
But you just have to be willing to make those uncomfortable approaches.
Yeah. Yep. Two things. One thing that you learned, Amy or Greg?
Well, I think the personal connection, you know, the personal interest is key. And that was a very good point. I'm glad you said that, because otherwise you might be getting into a little bit of a manipulative frame of mind, trying to get something from another person or organization. So, and it's key to being the good listener. That's key to that.
Okay, cool.
I was going to follow up on Greg's. Yes, the key is listening for sure, without a doubt, because there may be something that you didn't realize that you could actually utilize or use to better your situation. And I'm not saying get something from it, but like, say you learn a new way to do something that ends up helping you in your business or your company, or you can help other people with. So that's a good thing. And then the introvert, I tend to be more of an extrovert. However, I do have my introvert times. And when going to conferences, I try to make myself more of an extrovert, even if it's just to ask them about their job or ask them about their family or whatever, because you never know what other connections you may have. And yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Lisa, I also like what you said about curiosity. I'll remember that.
Okay, that's good.
I work remotely. I don't live in Sitka, but I work there. And so connections are really important to me. And so I will make an effort to definitely try to find people's faces a little bit more than just their email addresses. And when I am in Sitka for, you know, the times that I'm there, reaching out face to face with people and trying to make that connection so that they don't forget about me when I'm not there.
Yeah. Hey, stop in the Science Center.
I will, and I might recruit you for my advisory board. Because now we have a connection, right?
Oh, great. Well, that's neat. Really neat. Well, it's really nice to meet all of you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to hear from you. All right. Thank you, everybody. And have a great day.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, thanks, Lisa.